In the year 2000, Electronic Arts released a game that should have been an instant classic. A game built on one of the most iconic franchises in cinematic history. A game that promised gadgets, exotic missions, high-speed chases, and all the sleek car fantasy that comes with the James Bond name. That game was 007 Racing for the original PlayStation. But instead of giving players a fantasy of suave espionage behind the wheel, 007 Racing became infamous for something else entirely. A brilliant concept trapped inside a painfully clunky, uneven, and sometimes downright baffling execution, with, let's face it, a misleading title. So welcome to the Worst Racing Games, the internet series where you guys suggest different racing games that you think are terrible, then I play them, review them, and rank them. So yes, after last week's disappointment of DT Carnage on the PS2, we're moving once again away from PS2 slot racers towards the PlayStation 1, where the wheel has chosen us 007 Racing, a game called Racing where not much racing actually occurs. So we're going to ask the question, how did a James Bond game about cars manage to miss the mark so dramatically while still remaining strangely fascinating? So to get a better grasp of 007 Racing, we have to understand where the Bond franchise and the game industry were around the turn of the millennium. It was the year 2000, but the PlayStation 2 was on the horizon, and the Nintendo 64 had just given us the legendary GoldenEye. And the somewhat less legendary The World Is Not Enough. Bond games were hot, or at least publishers believed they could be. Electronic Arts held the license and wanted to expand Bond beyond the typical first-person shooter formula, and their idea? A standalone vehicle-focused Bond game where you wouldn't just occasionally drive a gadget-laden car, like in other Bond titles, you would drive them everywhere, all the time, and complete missions built around them. And to be fair to EA, which is not a sentence I say very often, it was actually a genius idea. Bond is practically synonymous with cool cars. The Aston Martin DB5 with its iconic machine guns, the Lotus Esprit submarine. There's so many good cars you can choose from these films. A car-centric Bond game kind of felt like a natural evolution of the series. But here's where the irony kicks in a little. 007 Racing ended up feeling like a modernized version of Spy Hunter. Except Spy Hunter was itself originally inspired by James Bond. So the Bond franchise circled around and accidentally ended up competing with its own imitator. So whilst 007 Racing may have been published by EA, the game was actually developed by Eutechnyx. Eutechnyx are a developer we've looked at on this channel a couple of times before, most notably with their entry of Ford vs Chevy, but also with Max Power Racing, also known as C3 Racing Car Constructors Championship, but also Total Driving for the PS1 as well. They've developed a lot of racing games over the years, all the way up to 2015 with NASCAR 15. And whilst they don't have a perfect track record, some of their games are genuinely not that bad. Anyway, I'm not sure if EA or Eutechnyx were the company behind the naming of the game, but whichever one of them named it 007 Racing is stupid. There's like no racing in this game. There's a couple of missions where you race against the clock, but other than that, it's all car combat and cool explosive set pieces. There's like no racing in this racing game. Now before we go any further, if you're a fan of racing games, PS1 games, or just retro games in general, then why not hit that subscribe button and tap the bell for notifications to stay up to date with the Worst Racing Games series. And whilst you're at it, if you're a big fan of this channel and you want to support it further, then please check out my Patreon using the link in the description below. It would be greatly appreciated. Over on my Patreon, you can get access to cool goodies such as early access to videos and your name in the credits of every upload. Anyway, that's enough selling the channel to you. Let's talk about the gameplay of 007 Racing. So the gameplay is where 007 both shines and stumbles in dramatic fashion. On paper, the game sounds pretty good. You get to drive a whole fleet of Bond vehicles, from the DB5, a couple of BMWs, and a handful of other franchise favourites. Each car is packed with gadgets from Q Branch. We're talking machine guns, missiles, oil slicks, smoke screens, you know, standard Bond stuff. And even more gimmicky ones like a high-tech laser designed for slicing tyres off of trucks. It sounds pretty cool. This is the kind of thing that Bond fans would dream of, and at its core, the actual driving in 007 Racing isn't bad. Acceleration, braking, and even the e-brake drift mechanic all feel surprisingly solid once you get used to it. The cars make convincing engine sounds. The sense of speed, at least occasionally when you have to get up to speed, is actually pretty good. But then, unfortunately, the rest of the game kicks in. So let's talk mission structure. 007 Racing uses an objective-driven mission format. Each level gives you a set of goals: protect a vehicle, destroy a convoy, disarm mines, or destroy computers, so on and so forth. And this could have been amazing, but the missions have a problem. Well, several problems, to be honest. The objectives are often somewhat confusing. Some levels feel like they were designed first and explained later, if explained at all. Take Airstrike, for example. You're supposed to safely detonate a series of mines, but the game barely communicates what you're actually meant to do. Even when you perform the objective correctly, the game will still knock you for damage. It's trial and error in the purest, but also the most frustrating sense. On top of this, in my opinion, the levels are a bit uneven. Some missions are super fun and a blast to play. Take the Escape level, a fast-paced jungle chase where you race against an assassin through Mexico. It feels like pure spy hunter adrenaline and stands out as one of the few levels where the sense of speed and danger truly lands, and the racing title actually kind of makes sense. But then, you have levels like Ambush and others that feel awkwardly balanced or oddly paced. Sometimes the enemies spawn in frustrating patterns. Sometimes the scoring system punishes you after you finish the level, telling you that you met all objectives but didn't hit the minimum score. That's like beating a boss in a game and then being told you didn't win hard enough. Speaking of the Ambush level, some of it just doesn't really make sense. You start the level, get ambushed by some cars, you can destroy them however you want: machine guns, bombs, missiles, any way that you can access in the level, and then you move on to the next segment and get jumped by some guys, and also a couple of forklift drivers. Now, theoretically, some tiny forklift trucks should just be able to be defeated by machine guns. You could kill the driver inside, but no, you can't. They have to be shot at from a certain angle, they're invincible to missiles, and all they can really be destroyed by is if you trick them into driving into some bombs, or shoot them in one very specific place. It doesn't really make that much sense. The game does also have some collision detection issues, and I can't overstate how much the collision detection does hurt the gameplay. Enemies can clip through your car, bullets will pass through targets and do nothing, especially to the human targets because they're quite small. Pedestrians vanish when you hit them, like they were beamed up in Star Trek, and it just makes combat feel slippery and unreliable. And when they've built this game around the point of combat, that's really not good. The other issue I have with the game design is the clunky level construction. Buildings, props, and environmental obstacles often feel like they were placed really without considering how the player needs to navigate the level. Some levels feel wide open and quite empty, and others, again, like the Ambush level, are quite cramped and honestly hard to maneuver. Now let's talk about the graphics of this game. By the year 2000, the PlayStation had masterpieces like Metal Gear Solid, Final Fantasy, Gran Turismo 2, Pro Skater 2, and Spyro 3. Developers had really pushed the PS1 to its absolute limits, which makes 007 Racing's visuals somewhat confusing. The game looks like it time traveled from the early lifespan of the PlayStation. The game has a very grainy resolution as well as some murky textures and some quite bad pop-in. The best way to describe it, it's like a prototype that forgot to evolve. Collision effects look wrong, the explosions look kinda cheap, and it's not just the world, the characters look tiny and indistinct. Bond's model might as well be a Lego figure wearing a tuxedo made of pixels. Even the HUD looks like it needed more polish. It's certainly not unplayable by any sense, but it definitely looks rough, especially for a game released after so many visually refined PS1 titles. And it's not like this had to have a small budget. 007's a massive name and EA is a big corporation. Whilst we're on the design side of things, let's talk about the sound design as well, because some of it is really good and some of it is really not so good. So the voice acting. Q is voiced by John Cleese, and as always, he's absolutely fantastic.
Don't even think about using the car as a battering ram, 007. Pick up some ammunition, for heaven's sake.
M sounds solid, other actors honestly hold their own, but Bond is kinda uncharismatic, there's no Pierce Brosnan voice here, so it really shows. Now in terms of the music, I was a little worried when I opened the game for the first time. The opening cutscene has a bunch of clips from different Bond movies, but instead of the Bond music playing over it, it's just some crappy nightclub music, and I was really concerned that this was just going to be the tone for the rest of the game.
Bond. James Bond.
Thankfully, when you're in the levels, you do actually get the Bond music playing and mixes of it, and it does sound really good, and it fits the theme really well. Now let's talk the critical response to 007 Racing. The game reviewed very averagely, veering more to the negative side of things. The game currently holds a 51 out of 100 on Metacritic for its critical score, and a generally unfavourable 4.9 out of 10 for its user score. So they're kind of similar, but the user score is just a bit lower. And having read through a couple of the user and critical responses, it appears to be the same. Really cool premise, very poor execution. These reviews would not stop the game going on to sell pretty well, however, as it sold over 500,000 copies estimated, with approximately 300,000 of those sales going from North America and the other 200,000 here in Europe. These stats are from VG charts. Now, another thing that I find very interesting when looking into these games is how much the game is currently valued today, as per price charting. And for the PAL version of 007 Racing, which is the version I would have had, for the still in box price we're looking at about £6.80, which, isn't very much. For just the disc alone about £4.50, but at least if it's still sealed you could pick it up for about £30, which I guess is what it would have cost new back in 2000. Anyway, so now the time has come to rank 007 Racing on our worst racing games tier list. Honestly, I didn't think this game was that horrible. I personally would have scored it a little higher than the critical reviews, so for me it's going to sit in the second from the top tier of just meh. It definitely has issues, but the concept alone is really cool, some of the set pieces were really cool, and there were moments where the game does shine. It's just a shame that there are a lot of moments that also drag it down. But you could certainly do far worse when it comes to a 007 game. So as we near the end, we have to ask, what exactly is 007 Racing? At its best, it's a really fun idea. A Bond game where you get to drive iconic gadgets in missions inspired by classic films. A car combat adventure filled with potential. But in practice, the game feels like an experiment that never fully came together. It's uneven, a little clumsy, and awkwardly designed in places. But here's the thing, it's not really a disaster like some of the other games we've seen in this series. It's just a bit disappointing. There are flashes of brilliance, the escape mission is genuinely really fun and thrilling, and some of the gadgets feel straight out of the movies. But looking back today, the game has a strange place in history. On the one hand, it's the only game that tries to deliver a purely vehicle-based Bond experience. That alone makes it unique. On the other hand, EA never revisited the idea. There was never a sequel, no spiritual successor. The concept just kind of vanished. Which is a shame because the game sold pretty well and could have had a sequel where they polished out all the issues with the original. And then we probably would have held that one in higher regard. And so that takes us to the end of our look at 007 Racing, and with it this week's episode of Worst Racing Games. So let me know in the comments down below, would you have ranked 007 Racing any differently? And if you've played it, let me know your thoughts on the game as well. And as always, if you have any suggestions to add to the wheel, please let me know. I'm pretty sure there's nearly 140 games on this wheel now, so this series is going to be around for a while. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to leave a like, and if you haven't done so already, subscribe and tap the bell for notifications to stay up to date with my future uploads. A massive shout out to my Patreon subscribers for the continued support, and all I really have left to say is, bye bye.